of law enforcement. Not only do we cover true crime, I go out into the field and assist families who have lost loved ones to homicide and their cases are considered cold. Join me as we look and bring attention to these critical cases. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're able to join us tonight. If you're new to the channel, welcome. And as always, as you come into our channel, be respectful of the families, mods, and each other. We'll have a presentation, and during that presentation, if you have any questions, just throw them in chat there. Mrs. Steve, of course, is not able to sit here with me tonight, and that will, after we get everything settled up and get back into a single property, we'll be able to do that. Right now, we're working out of two different states, and eventually we'll be in Florida totally, and I look forward to that. And but this week I'm traveling some, and I'll be heading into the Midwest working some cold cases, so just bear with me. But tonight we're going to be talking about the Kohberger case and shoe prints and what they can tell us, and looking at some data that Mrs. Steve and I did a year ago, March of 2023, and a question that was posed to me by Daniel of the Drunk Turkey Show that had me on his show last night, and we were discussing, and his community had some great questions. And so I compiled last year's show with this show to show some of the similarities between the testing, and I'll explain those as we get into it. But right now, if you have any information about this case, so that we can have justice for Madison, Kaylee, Ethan, and Zana, absolutely make sure that law enforcement has that information, because it's critical, as we have an offender that has been charged. Of course, he's innocent to proven guilty, but he has been charged. They have probable cause to hold him and bring him to trial. And some of the evidence that we're looking at tonight, of course, was involved in the probable cause affidavit. It was mentioned in search warrants, and specifically about a single shoe print that was located in a critical area where one of the witnesses said, "This is where the offender walked past me at." And when they went back and found it at a later time, then they missed it during the first initial. And this is something that's quite common, that happens at a lot of crime scenes, that you may not find everything because there's so much information there and you're processing things, and it depends on everything from what that piece of evidence is, the background of it, the color rate, what colors, breakups, camouflage. There's a lot of things that can break up anything that you might expect, that once it's been enhanced by some type of chemical, of course, it just pops out there. And there's a lot of different chemicals that you can use in crime scenes. In this case, they mentioned amido black, which is a different chemical than what I commonly use. But every person has a reason for what they do at the crime scenes. That CSI will, whatever their chemicals of choice are and why they pick that one specific chemicals, is based upon their experience and the results they've had with that chemical in the past. I've had good results with limonol. It's easy to use, and whenever I process it, I'm able to make it really pop and be able to demonstrate a lot of the characteristics that through the filters and the enhancing of the photograph, so that y'all can better understand what can be left at these scenes. But anyway, that being said, let's get in here. And of course, last year, Mrs. Steve and I, we set up a boardwalk type of situation of, whereas she would be walking in this pattern, that I would introduce into this area a passive pool of synthetic blood, and she would step in it, walk this path, and it came out to be 120 to 140 feet total. But there are certain areas as you walk and as you add on, it's just over 120 feet. I think some of the images I took are over, I think it's like at 130. But anyway, you'll see that as we go into it. But I wanted to see how long that if an individual, and Mrs. Steve was wearing a pair of Van shoes, as what was described, having a similar sole characteristics as that line of shoes. But she wore them and she stepped in that passive pool of synthetic blood and began her walk. And through that walk, we were able to see from the moment of saturation and as she walked and the transfers that occurred. And there's a point during those transfers that you go from a oversaturated type of print to where it's well defined. And with the recent test that I did with that for Daniel, and looking at from the point of what if the offender was wearing a pair of booties or shoe covers, and what would that have? What kind of impact would that have on the shoe print? Which was a good question. While I had put booties on, I had taken them off or the shoe covers off in other testing, and so I didn't know what the real results or what the findings would be, or how it would differ. And so I took that test and this test, and you'll see some of the similarities. And when you go back and review it, you'll look at certain parts of it, and you'll see that it's uncanny about some of the information, that it doesn't matter if that shoe is just straight without any type of protective booty or shoe cover. And when you put the shoe cover on, that at a certain point, the shoe cover becomes useless. Didn't know that until I conducted these tests, and it was quite fascinating. But here is, you can see from where the passive pool is, and then you can see the tracks of the shoes as Mrs. Steve started her walk. And you see the heavy saturations of those first few feet from 1 foot to 2 foot, 3 foot, 6 foot, and those distances of that oversaturation as she started down that boardwalk. And then we went all the way out with Mrs. Steve walking this, and at 40 feet, you see that there's really not that much. Around 40 feet, we start getting a little bit clearer, almost disappearing, almost latent print that you can't see at the 40 feet mark. You have a left foot and right foot in this image. And also, when Mrs. Steve came back around to the 120 feet location, you can see just a little bit of smudges. Now, that changes once we enhance these with the chemical processing. Would it have worked with amido black? Yes. Would it work with the luminol? And the reason I don't use a lot of amido black in my testing on this is with the synthetic blood, the amido black doesn't react in the same manner that luminol does. And so that's one of the reasons I don't use a lot of amido black. But here's what you see, that once you hit with luminol, that those images from the 40 foot gives a absolutely well-defined characteristics of the sole pattern, and you can identify, and this is what they saw and what they described in that probable cause affidavit as far as being a Van sole pattern of that type of pattern. And you can see also that both prints are almost latent. I mean, you can see on the 40 foot on the left side, before the chemicals or luminol was applied in a darkened area, you can see that you can just barely see the outline of the shoe at the 40 feet. At the 132, it's clearly not able to be seen or determine any characteristics about that sole pattern. But you can see that when the chemicals are hooked on there, that absolutely it'll still pop out. While it doesn't have all the characteristics and clear definition that you see in the 40 feet, you could still tell probably shoe size, shoe width, if there were certain damages done to the sole of the shoe, you might be able to identify them. Whereas with the 40 feet, you could clearly identify a lot of individualized characteristics or damage that might have occurred to that shoe wear pattern from an offender wearing it throughout their daily activities, and which is very important in a lot of cases. It's just like being able to take a tire track from a crime scene that has certain damage to the tread design. It works the same with shoes. And so experts are out there that can go in there, analyze these patterns, these characteristics, identify flaws or identify some type of wear pattern that individualizes that shoe to a certain person that law enforcement locates it. Now, if law enforcement doesn't locate a shoe that was seen at a crime scene and they don't have it in hand, it's been destroyed along with any type of other clothing cover or measures, countermeasures to conceal someone's identity, then of course that's just something. But maybe in the future, if those items are found, as in this case, right now we don't know where a lot of these items could be. Law enforcement may have a better understanding, and at some point they may locate these. And if so, that will be extremely interesting. All right, before we get into that, let me try to keep up with chat. Hello, Di, Mitzi, Olivia 2, Copper Horse. All right, if you have any questions, throw them in there, and I will try to get to them. Marion Tate, good to see you as always. This will do nicely. Good to see you. Unearthed Secrets. Having pizza tonight. Senior B, how you doing? Oh, me. Paula Lee, Josh the Posh. Barbara Hall, good to see you. And if y'all don't know who Barbara Hall is, check out Timmy's D's case. That Barbara Hall is his mother. And it is a story of a mother seeking justice for her child. And absolutely, she is an extremely strong person, which I respect much. Nanar, good to see you. Will Warren is in Florida. Good to see you. Matt, Molly, let's see here. Just trying to check, see if there's anybody new or any questions, because I don't want to get too far behind. Let's see here. Let's see. But I appreciate everybody being here. Yes, Mountain Mom. I appreciate you watching that show and also being here tonight. I'm doing some comparison between last night's show and this one that was done almost exactly. It's 51 weeks between the two shows, and I found that interesting also. Kelly, good to see you. Let's see here. Josh Posh says, if I remember correctly, there might only be one or two legible bloody shoe prints among many less legible and latent ones, right? I would expect that there's going to be a large mixture, and shoe prints, if they're in certain stages, can be easily damaged. And there's a lot of things that can happen through either first responders, law enforcement, crime scene techs, and anything and everything can happen at those crime scenes. Through the encounters from the victims and the offenders, they can have a lot of different types of transfers, smears, anything and everything can happen to them. And then as the offender moves through the house, there will be certain times that he may be on some type of floor or flooring that isn't receptive to good prints, carpet and things, although you can still at times It just depends on what type of carpet it is. But certain surfaces are more conducive to good footprints than others. And so we just really don't know. Now, would I expect that they would be hundreds of footprints legible? No. But I would expect that there's multiple good footprints in this house. And so they picked one that had an impact of supporting evidence that our witness says that this individual was standing here. I saw him at this distance. This is what he looks like, to emphasize how close that offender was to the witness. And they chose that footprint. And I understand it why. And there's a lot of argument about it. Is this footprint even belonging to the offender? A lot of them are saying it belongs to one of the witnesses. If law enforcement didn't have confidence that this belonged to the offender and not to the witness, if this turned out to be that it was the witness's footprint or one of the victim's footprints, which I think there's zero chance for the fact that it's in the probable cause affidavits. Of all the footprints that are going to be checked that we have in-house, that we know, they're going to check that footprint against every known person in that house, every victim, every law enforcement officer that walked in, CSI. They're going to check it and cross-reference it out to make sure that it's not part of the investigative team or one of the residents in the house or any witness. And so I look at that is just some rumor that has very little, if any, basis. And this is Alan says, it seems like there wouldn't be much blood on the floor since they were the homicides occurred in other rooms in the bed. And that's exactly what this test that Mrs. Steve and I did way back then, and the test I did now, is that, yes, you may not see a lot of blood 30 or 40 feet away, just like this, that when you look at this piece of whiteboard on the left where it says 40 feet and 132 feet, that you don't see a lot of blood. But when you hit it with those chemicals, it absolutely lights up and shows you that, yes, there is a presence of blood here, and it reacts, which is critical information. All right, let's get back into the slideshow. And this is the test that Daniel asked me and that we looked at. What would, if you put booties or shoe covers on, or if you prep for a scene that you was going to, that when you got to the scene that you was going to have protective layers on, you're going to have your shoes covered, and you're just going to throw everything on, go commit your crime, try to commit the perfect crime, and then you'll dispose of everything. Your shoes, your booties, your clothing, your face mask, gloves, whatever, that if he decked himself out with all this material, then what would the shoe covers impact be on a footprint as you walk through the crime scene? And once again, like Mrs. Steve did last year, this time she was in Florida and I didn't have her to be able to walk with the van shoes. So I took a pair of my shoes. I can't put my feet in Mrs. Steve's shoes. Her feet are extremely small, and I have extremely large feet. So, so it just didn't work out. So I had to wear a pair of my shoes and cover them with these shoe covers. And I did the layout with the same type of board that I used before, and had a pattern where I would walk counterclockwise and do this testing and walk. This time, rather than just walking a set distance, I walked for 15 minutes. Now, I know people say, well, he wasn't in the house for 15 minutes. Regardless of the timeline, I chose this to show that, or to test an overkill of what the time would be and what possibly the outermost limits are, because you're never going to be able to hit all of them. And whenever I conduct these tests, I try to push them to the extreme, to the point that at some point they fail. And that's what happened with this, that somewhere between 10, 11, 12 minutes and 15 minutes, the shoes, the booties and the shoe covers quit transferring the blood that was in the that was that had originally saturated that material that the shoe covers are made out of. And when that occurred, then of course, unless you step into another area that has some type of liquid form and can be transferred again, you're not going to continue those transfers. And all right. And the picture on the left with the booties that are kind of have that reddish tint to it, those are the booties after the saturation and after 15 minutes of walking. You can almost see through them, a little bit different than when they were on and they were new and fresh. Couldn't quite see through them. You can see through them here. And when I removed those booties, the boots on the shoes on the right are those shoes with the shoe covers removed. And you can see here high in the heel, there's some little areas of where it's shiny and reflective that is some of the liquid synthetic blood that's still there. And whereas the rest of the shoe, it looks dry, it doesn't look like there's any type of contamination. But when you're enhancing and working with these chemicals, it will absolutely light up the world once you process it. And if you go back and you look at the prints left by Mrs. Steve early on, the first loop, this print that's to the left or at the top part, the first loop, that shoe print is probably left somewhere around the first 12 feet or so. And you'll see there's some cast off that was coming off the shoe. Those long linear lines are blood spatter that occurred that was I moved my foot forward and it hit the surface and stopped. Whatever blood was loaded to the front of that shoe and on the shoe cover, the booty, continued forward in a cast off pattern. And that's what it creates. And that's what it looks like, a low impact blood pattern cast off. Now, the bottom shoe that you see that says second loop, that's somewhere around the 30 to 40 feet area, and which is very similar to a little bit more saturation, a little bit darker than with Mrs. Steve's shoe at the 40 foot, but pretty similar. I mean, you could still see some design of Mrs. Steve's, and when you go back, you'll see that. But with it heavily saturated, you can't see any telltale signs of what type of characteristics make up the sole of that shoe, but you can by the time the second loop gets there. And so that was something that until I went back and looked at the data, I found interesting, that wearing a booty somewhere around 40 feet, you're going to get those clear transfers. Same with if you're wearing a pair of shoes without booties or shoe covers, you're going to get that clear transfer. So somewhere between I don't know, probably the 20 to 50 foot area of a saturated shoe print, you would expect that's where you're going to start finding these shoe prints that have characteristics, identifiable features, and patterns that an expert could look at and say, oh, this is what it is. And so while it's 30 foot, you're still only looking at probably, I think the average person steps just a little bit of or step pattern is somewhere with a two-step that is measured somewhere around 5 point something feet. So just over 2.5 feet between each shoe print. So even when you're looking at that 20-foot area, you're only looking at the possibility of 4 or 5 shoe prints that would be within that 20, 25 to 40, 45, 50 foot area, ever how you want to break it up. And that if they stepped in a passive pool, that you're only going to see very few. You're not going to have hundreds of shoe prints that in that Goldilocks zone of transfers. That's where it was. You would expect that shoe print to be, and in the Goldilocks, regardless of shoe cover or without shoe cover, it appears that both of them exist in the same distance. All right. And there was certain things about that shoe that when I look at it, that you can tell that, oh, with that booty on, there were some unknown characteristics that are included in that saturated shoe. And that's due to that the booty, even outside the shoe pattern itself, you can see that they have these little pointed tags. And I pointed it out and drawed it out so you can clearly see where those are. That as the shoe came down, not only does the sole of the shoe create a pattern, but the overextended part of the booty will also create a image, and which is very interesting and is interesting in the CSI world. That yes, these are clues that, oh, if we see this, they took some extra precaution. They're wearing booties or something that, but you can see from the drag part on the heel to the back to where the toe, where you have those distinguishing areas. And this is what the sole of that shoe looks like with the cover removed and the booty removed, and the shoe being sprayed with luminol and photographs taken. After I run it through some filters, enhance it, you can see that it is bright, clearly defines a lot of characteristics on the bottom of that shoe print, which is in the world of CSI can mean a lot. And as we've seen, it was included with the probable cause affidavits. And so regardless if the offender prepped, and uh, and I have utmost confidence that that shoe print belongs to the offender, and because law enforcement included it in the probable cause affidavit, and no one wants, no law enforcement officer out there in the world wants to be sitting on a stand and be questioned by a defense attorney and said, which says that, oh, that shoe print belonged to the person you was talking to that told you it was going to be there, and they have evidence of that, and that's not going to be the case. I think Daniel mentioned a certain size of this shoe print being extremely large. I don't know if that's correct or not, but if it is, good. I just don't know it exactly the dimensions of that shoe. And then this print goes from the saturated print to which both of these pictures are made of the exact same area. One area, the picture to the left, is a saturated shoe print with a latent print just to the 1 o'clock position of that print that you see on the right, that when you enhance it, and this is what latent prints are. Doesn't matter if it's a fingerprint, don't matter if it's a shoe print, doesn't matter. It's latent. You can't see it clearly. You might see a hint of it, but you don't understand it until you use some type of chemical to enhance it, whereas you can start distinguishing certain patterns, which you can in this one. And I processed this just to bring that point forward. All righty. Let's get back into chat now. What was with a mystery shoe print in the corner? I don't know about the mystery shoe print in the corner. Would I expect that there's probably a lot of different types of shoe prints that are at the scene? Absolutely. Could it be? Let me go back. Um, that you'll have a lot of different shoe prints that can be found at crime scenes. They can be saturated, they can be well defined, they could be, but I don't know in what document. If you have a document that's made public that says that there's a mystery shoe print or something in a corner, send that link to me. I'm interested in that. Alan Hinkle, good to see you. Gil Moser. Is Nightbot attacking people? Yeah, anytime during violent struggles and if injuries occur, victims, it's not uncommon for victims to leave their own um, different types of transfers, cast off, shoe prints of whereas they may, um, you know, step in their own blood patterns and cast off to pools, or in this case, we have the potential of four people being victimized, that it could have been from any of them. Hello, Madison. Good to see you. I'm not too far behind, about 18 minutes. Tracy Turner, Mitzi. Let's see. Trying to see if there's any questions. I don't like to miss too many questions. I hope I don't. Sharinthia. That's a wonderful name, Sharinthia Newman. Very nice of you. Thank you. I hope I didn't butcher your name too bad. Have got the Newman part, but the Sharinthia. I'm sure I'm butchering that. I'm sorry. I apologize if I am. Yes, yes. There's when people say there's no DNA. Of course, we have the victim's DNA. There's going to be plenty of that. But as far as the offender's DNA, I expect that there is DNA there, but finding it—that's the part. And I believe that there is more than likely a high percentage, um, well, higher than what has been found. Anything's higher than what's been found. But other than that, we have that one DNA profile off the knife. But I expect that on the victims somewheres that there will be some other DNA. They just haven't located it yet, or they may have, and we're just unaware of it. Yes, Josh. Law enforcement, they can pick and choose any part of any pieces of evidence. It's just probable cause. They're not going to lay out the whole case. They're not going to say that, just like if an individual has been shot with a firearm and they take a bullet out, that he was shot, bullet was recovered from the victim, and doesn't mean that the victim was only shot one time. They could be 12 gunshots in it, and they've recovered one. So it's just in the usage and the verbiage within these documents that allows certain speculation, and sometimes people take it to the extremes. I expect that they have several other shoe prints, um, maybe not dozens. Now, do I think there's probably dozens of shoe prints in there? Yes, but of identifiable ones, probably not. Junior Johnson. Mr. D, is it true most people make three mistakes in a crime scene? I would say that's probably as few mistakes are made in a crime scenes, and because unorganized offenders make far more mistakes than organized offenders. But uh, at the end of the day, whenever justice is served for any of these individuals, this crime or any other crime, when you go back and look at the mistakes made, either it's going to be through the digital um, footprint, all the tracking abilities of a vehicle, times that you're caught on cameras from all the different streets and homes and rings, to um, uh, turning off your phone on one side of of the crime scene and then turning it on a distance on the other side of the crime scene. Um, Anything and everything that when you go back and look at it and you see it afterwards, you'll see that the three is probably going to turn into 53 or 103 mistakes. And but once we see the prosecution bringing their narrative and evidence into the case, and then seeing can the uh, defense explain away that narrative and all those um, pieces of evidence and those mistakes, because those mistakes are often exactly the evidence that convicts them. And so uh, if you replace the word mistakes with evidence, then that's when you see that, oh, every piece of evidence left there is a mistake that the offender didn't want to leave there. Junior Johnson. Yeah, the shoe covered booties. Yes. There is no shape, form, or fashion. Um, I might be able to get three of my toes in Mrs. Steve's shoes. She has tiny feet. She does. She is a Wonder Woman. She works extremely hard, and I've never, whenever I ask her, "Hey, this is what we want to do," you know, absolutely. The only thing that she ever backed off of one time was we were looking at I think a Scott Peterson case, and throwing her out of a boat in December to see and test that, and so she said, "No, you're not going to throw me out of a boat in December," which I take as there's 11 months that I can throw her out of a boat of, but not December. Alley Cat, good to see you. Yes, Molly. How many people go out and put a bunny suit on and get drugged through the shoes, through the woods? Absolutely. Let's see here. Joshua Potts, if a shoe is found consistent with a print and considering the gap in time between crime and recovery, would a unique ID be possible or just consistent with? And that's where shoes and any type of clothing can be critical, because if you had the if you take a shoe that they're able to analyze the sole pattern and perform DNA testing from the soles, and it comes back to the crime scene. But now they go inside the shoe into uh, every part of the interior of the shoe, and they get the offender's DNA. Outside of the shoe has the crime scene, inside the shoe has the offender. And even, and from the outside of the shoe, you may even have some of the offender's environment that he works in or his home that could be cross contaminated, and a lot of different information on the outside of that shoe. But through body fluids, sweat, skin cells, there's a possibility that they could identify the wearer of that shoe through any type of cross contamination. Even as you put on a shoe, a lot of times, how do you hold that shoe? And as y'all dress, look at it sometimes when you're picking up the shoes. Where are your fingers? They may even be inside the inner parts of the shoe, or as you reach down to pull it on or slip it on. You're using it almost like one of the old shoe tongues that you'll reach inside the shoe and try to pop it up over your heels. There's a lot of different ways that skin cells and body fluids and sweat and other things of you putting on a shoe with or without a sock that can contaminate that shoe with your own DNA. Hello, Grunt Turkey Show. Glad you're here. Appreciate you being here, and thank you. That's very kind of you. Like I said, Daniel asked me, posed a question, and I hadn't, for whatever reason, I've done uh, testing. I think it was even on the Murdoch case, so that I could show during the shooting of what would occur from the back spatter of the gunshot on different parts of the clothing. I think it had some with booties, and I've done some other testing, but not to the extent that Daniel wanted. And I found it extremely revealing that it was surprising to me that at 40 feet, the booty, while it was still on the shoe cover, while it was still on it, it gave a clear outline through that saturated booty of the exact shoe print. Found that amazing. Olivia, too, good to see you. Yes, it is. That when you look in that Goldilocks zone of clear now, where you seen with Mrs. Steve, that even, like I said, when you get out there to 132 feet, there were still some images that are uh, able to be documented, and I found that extremely interesting. And that transfer still could occur. And this, like I said, was just with a van shoe without any type of booty or shoe cover on it. And it's just the regular transfer that from being a latent to absolutely popping when you enhance it. But there's a Goldilocks zone out there that, in this case, that whereas at the 40 feet, from here on out, when people ask me where would I expect to find a shoe print, I'm gonna tell them it's somewhere between 25 and 50 feet, regardless if they're wearing a booty or if they're wearing a shoe that I would expect. Now that's from my testing and what I can speak of, and so I have firsthand knowledge of that, and so I will, that's what I would think would be the Goldilocks zone of 40 feet that of the whole shoe print. You're going to get a clear image. Now before that, you may get some that are a little bit oversaturated. After that, you'll probably start getting some on that are thin and have missing areas, such as you see at 132 feet, of some voids that are not clearly defined. Molly, if the only footprint you have was the first saturated one, and it was a regular shoe, not a booty, would you be able to tell anything about it? And I can answer that right here. If you look at these images, when Mrs. Steve stepped in there and her first step, second step, third step, you see Mrs. Steve is her steps are um, um, what somewhere's around just over 2 feet as she steps to get from 3 to 6. But and you can see even at 6 foot, they're still oversaturated. You can't see a lot of details on her third or fourth. But by the time she gets out there at 40 feet, somewhere around 20 steps away is where this um, comes in. That when you enhance it, I guess if I had darkened the 40 foot, you could probably, I didn't filter it out like I did um, uh, with Daniel's test, but you would be able to see them. So yes, those first few steps from a passive pool of synthetic blood or blood, they're going to be oversaturated. Not going to tell a lot about them. No, I don't know if he had booties on or not. This test was to test that idea that if you did, because some people has been theorizing that, well, he dressed up, covered his shoes with booties. He didn't leave any shoe prints due to they had booties on or whatever. Law enforcement says that there's shoe prints there, but no, this was just a test to see what would the difference and the impact be if he had booties on versus not having them on. And this test reveals there's not a lot of impact between the two at a certain distance. And I found that fascinating. Yarn lover, Regina, good to see you. Thank you, Olivia, too. Marcia Dull, love your work, Mr. Steve. How does that luminol work? It's so bright. The luminol is, when you see it with the naked eye, it's not this contrasting. I mean, you can clearly see that. Oh, here's a reaction. Your night vision is there by the time that you're working in this environment for when you're spraying, you're in total darkness. And so you see that glow. And then, of course, you set your cameras up, and I set mine for a 30-second exposure. So that camera sitting there with the shutter open for 30 seconds, burning into the used to be film, not film now, but that camera's collecting all that light, reflective light, or the luminescence, not reflective, but the luminescence from that reaction of the luminol and the synthetic blood or blood. And then I go in and run it through some filters and make it have this absolutely brilliant contrast so that I can speak of it and show each of the of you how that footprint can be enhanced and looked at and analyzed. Uh, Right, Witter, Nightbot needs a snicker. Bad Nightbot. Is it expensive to buy and use aluminol? Hi, Mrs. Steve. Um, yeah, she's. I'll tell her. But yes, all the equipment that I buy, yes, there is a cost to it, but I think the value that it brings to a case and the understanding that that once you see it and understand it, that it assists all the web sleuths out there. That when they speak of a case, they'll have some type of understanding of what law enforcement and the abilities of what law enforcement. It's not like when you look at TV and the CSI people out there of how quick and things are processed. That's not real world. But hopefully at some point it gets that way, but not right now. NH Mountains. Hello, good to see you. Um, Drunk Turkey says law enforcement took a size 13 shoe from BK's arrest. I think it was New Balance, but could have been Nikes. Actually, I think those shoes that I was wearing possibly were New Balance. I don't know, but possibly. Alan says his defense is talking a lot about no DNA in the car, apartment, and office. If there was only a little on the knife, do you think they would be screaming that from the rooftop? I think more in the house. There is I expect there is. Has it been discovered yet? Who knows? But I do expect that there is more DNA either on the victim's clothing, on the victims uh, uh, that they may have been able to recover, and we'll just have to see. And if they took the walls, took the flooring, I don't know what they took from the house, but it's nothing to do that. If you have a desire and you're processing the scene and you say that's evidence, you take it. Cut holes. Hello, Holly. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yeah, she gets anxious sometimes. She did the same thing whenever I was working the road or going out on a SWAT call out or something. She get anxious sometimes. True crime web. Based on a comment from Alan Hinkle, can you tell from a footprint if a person is wearing much larger shoes to try and hide their shoe size? Um, I don't know if that would be possible or not. Would the weight distribution be highlighted in certain areas, um, and what would occur? I really don't know. There was a there was a crime where an individual did something similar to where he had cut off some boot um, soles and attached to his regular shoes for some, but I remember that case. I can't remember where it was, but there was a case where someone did try to do something to stage the crime scene, and for whatever reason, but they cut the shoe soles off and attached them for some reason. If a dog was locked in a bedroom while the crimes occurred, one who let him out. How was he out without being covered with blood? Was he maybe he was carried? Thinking out loud. I don't know where the dog was found, or if he was out, or even if um, the if Kohberger or the offender, whoever is involved, whoever is the one that's part of it, opened the door and the dog ran out. I have no idea. Have you ever had dogs to smell and look for things? Sure. They've got all different types of dogs now, trained for different types of disciplines. We had canines from tracking. Then they brought in dogs that were for bomb. Uh, and then, uh, most of these dogs are have multitasking abilities now that they can track, they can attack or defend and assist officers in self defense and things and take down criminals. Uh, there are certain disciplines and animals out there trained to process crime scenes and look for certain elements of a crime. So, absolutely amazing. And then, of course, you got dogs that cadavers, and I've worked with those also, not as a handler, but I've seen them in as they worked different scenes. Gosh, I got tacos tonight. Taco Thursday. Honey Hill, good to see you. Terry Faye, good to see you. Louise Tresco, just check and see if there's any more questions. Yeah, Scott, it's amazing some of the criminals that have fan clubs. You know, I mean, if Charles Manson could have a fan club, anyone can. Is the latent print of any use if the shoes are not recovered? Absolutely. If this shoe size is of a 13, you're looking at a smaller population of people that wear a specific shoe size. You may have that throughout the general population. We all fit in that we may wear, like I wear a certain shoe size. It depends on brand, but that that shoe size, of course, puts me in a certain category, um, and it would for this individual. And if he fits in that, that's just another key point that while law enforcement says that this latent print was recovered um, and a van shoe, that they will look at it and say, well, this is the width of the shoe, because that's something that while I wear a 13 to 13 and a half, but what's odd about my foot is not that it's 13 or 13 and a half, it's that it's quality. I have extremely wide feet. I tear shoes up. My foot goes out the sides of them. Mrs. Steve gets on me all the time, and so I have to order special shoes that are extra wide, or they don't last very long. And so, in that world of things, even within a certain shoe size, I'm in a different subcategory because of the width of my foot. And that all that information would be something that they can use, because if Kohberger's shoe print is outside the parameters of that shoe size, the defense is going to eat that up. Steve, if an offender wore larger shoes, could certain characteristics of the crime scene indicate that? Types of smears, streaks, evidence of particular struggles. I wouldn't expect, and I don't, the supporting evidence and trying to look at the totality of the evidence there. That let's say that Kohberger wears this size 13 shoe. Let's just say it's a 13 shoe. That if it was being staged and people say, well, the DNA was staged there, or it was, put there to absolutely point the finger at a patsy identified as Kohberger. Well, now we've got that someone would also have to know his shoe size and go out and buy a pair of shoes that's within what his shoe size is. So they would have that research. But what we have is, if this is, we know we have Kohberger's DNA profile there, but now do we have a shoe that fits within a smaller part of the population? And that's huge. That, oh, not only do we have a size 13 shoes, because not many people on the jury, you know, are going to have that shoe size, or even in the population of a specific shoe size. So even that information can be supporting evidence of the DNA profile. And that's whereas that people can say, well, law enforcement planted the DNA. Well, they would also have to have some type of ability to say that our person that we don't know who this knife belongs to in the early part, because there's a timeline of when that DNA was obtained, and it's going to be early on because they were eliminating people. And so the shoe print was recovered early on. It was missed during the first search, but it was found early on. And this is also something that is supporting evidence that it is within the parameters of what Kohberger's shoe size is. And so now we have more than just the DNA. We have other supporting evidence that it's from a small part of the population that wears this certain shoe size. and certain shoe width. Because we all wear shoes that we find comfortable. Yeah, and Brenda's correct. These trackers out there, some of them have skill sets that's absolutely phenomenal. And but I don't know if there's been any studies done as far as wearing oversized shoes and with blood stains. That's a good question. Yes, actually, it said, did you know Charles Manson has a son? Yes, that was in. Uh, they did that uh, series about him. Yes, the trial is going to be quite a while. TJK, good to see you. Marshall Dole, is there a crime that you're baffled by and one you know you can solve? I'm baffled a lot by a lot of different crimes out there. So yes, there's a lot of crimes out there that baffle me. Um, and sometimes when you're looking at these things, um, Doug Carter with the Richard Allen case, we only need one tip. I've never worked a case in my life that if one tip, if it's the right one, it's going to solve it. So there's always information, and there's new technologies, and there's new ways of looking at stuff, and um, you'll be amazed at uh, when you have access to certain information that it all makes sense. But getting that uh, one piece of information is hard sometimes, and sometimes it falls in your lap. All right, I got caught up, guys. Been here just over an hour. I appreciate everybody being here. And if you have any questions or anything, I appreciate if you throw them in comments, or I will try to get back to all of those. And like I said, if you have any information on this case, make sure that the law enforcement has it, prosecution, defense, someone, so that we can have justice for each of these families and these victims. They deserve it. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and for your support. It means a lot to us. I'll be on the road as I am now, but I'll be on the road even more. I've got a lot of things to do in the next 4 to 5, 6 days, and I've got a lot of miles to cover. And but y'all stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon. And but it's I look forward to getting back with y'all just as soon as I can, guys. Good night.